Hey, so there's a lot of tutorials and stuff, on the internet about getting started with Tina. I just want to show how I structure things like a little bit different, and it helps me get started faster. I can work on projects better, and it makes it a little easier to set up things in like a slightly more advanced way. I think it's also a good basis for lots of other things. So we'll talk about more stuff in the future, but this is just like your essential getting started. So the first thing is you need to have Node.js installed, right? So just go to node.org or whatever, nodejs.org, and grab the latest current and get that installed. However you do that on your system. Once you've got that, you should have npm and Node, and this is very every web developer does this stuff, so it's probably already done. You're ready to go. So I've got some weird old version, but it's not as old as the long-term support, so it's probably fine. So that's the first step. Next thing is go to tina.io, and you can see that there's a nice big getting started right here. So let's just do that. Now, personally, I don't really use Yarn, so I just kind of use the built-in tools. So I'm going to choose npm over Yarn. You can choose either one; it doesn't really matter. All these options are cool. If you're going to use Tailwind, try out the Tailwind starter. It does have like a few more things in it that are ready made, but I'm going to start with the Barebones starter just because I'm going to kind of like go through things from scratch. So this is a good very bare bones like starter just to get things going. Now this takes a little while. It's doing an npm install in the background, so it takes a minute to like do all that. But we can actually look at it right now if we want. And you can see it put some files in here. There's some template files that I'll end up removing as soon as it's done. I'll probably remove readme and yarn lock just because I don't really use those, and the README is just some boilerplate like README from the template project. So I'll just get rid of that. So it looks like it's just about done. So let's remove that. And here I'll let's see. Is there anything else that we don't need right away? I think that's good. Okay. So let's see what we have just to start out with nothing else. So if I do npm run dev, this is just a fresh install with no configuration, no changes or anything. So initially we have this page, which is like our basic page, and we have this GraphQL console thingy, and it lets you like sort of reach in and grab any data that you need, and you can look at like what the structure of the data on the current site is. So that's pretty nice. And then you can go to /admin and you can get your site. So if we go, or your site editor. So if we go there, let's take a look at that and just see how that goes. On local editing, it doesn't really try and actually authenticate you or do anything else. So we've just got this, and you can see that there's page content and blog posts. So that's pretty good. That's a good start. If we wanted to play with queries and see how the data looks and things like that, we can do that later, but we're not going to really need that for like a little while. So, all right, so it looks good. So again, I'm just going to check and make sure that everything's in a pretty clean state. So let's open this up in my editor. I use Sublime Text, but if you want to use VS Code, or you want to use whatever you use, Vim, doesn't matter. However you do that is fine. So we've got this .tina folder, and this is basically the main thing that differentiates a Tina site from just a regular Next.js site. Now they have plans to support more kinds of like frameworks. Eventually you should be able to like host just about any kind of site using Tina. But for right now, it is a pretty good idea to use Next.js. They've kind of like built it around that, for the initial versions or whatever. And in general, I think you'll have a much better time. If you're already using Next.js, you'll know, how to set that up and use that and all that kind of stuff. But yeah, I think this is a good angle for now. So one of the first things I like to do is I like to Oh, there's one other thing too. So I use standard JS, which is like a no configuration linter, and it just fixes things for me as I go. So I don't really need this prettier file. And let's double check here. I should just be able to do mpxy standard. Oh, and I'll do fix. Okay, that's working good. And so I tend to just kind of clean things out that aren't related to my specific workflow. You don't have to do this at all. It's completely optional. It's just me kind of cleaning things out. Now, trickily, I don't think that style components is actually used in the Barebones. I'm not sure why it's in here, but they put it in there. I don't even know if React is being used. I'm not really sure. One way we could test is we could remove those two and just see what happens. So maybe I'll just explore that right now. So let's see React is and style components, and we'll see if everything breaks. If it does, it's no big deal. We can just add it back, but we might be able to get rid of some dependencies there. When you're working with Next.js and Tina and all this stuff, there are a lot of dependencies. So there's no real way around that. So you just kind of have to like accept it from the start. So it looks like, okay. Oh, I hit the wrong one. So here's another thing I should fix right now. So npm start is a common way to start a dev server, but start means something different on here. So what you can do is you can just change dev to start, and it just makes the command slightly shorter. But it runs TinaCMS dev underneath it all. Okay, so that all works. That's fine. All right, so now we've got this site, and that's basically just to prevent me from typoing npm start, because I do this instinctively for every project I work on. You don't have to do that at all. So it seems like everything runs. Let's just double check, but yeah, it doesn't seem like it really needs style components or React is. So we just got rid of two dependencies, which is great. But again, if you're really worried about dependencies, this is probably not the stack for you, because there is going to be a lot of stuff. All right, so here we've got like our bare bones thing, and that's great. Let's start restructuring things. So one of the first things I like to do is you see how there's collections in the .tina/schema.js file. Well, I like to do fancy stuff with my collections, so I tend to put them in separate files. Now there's a few ways to like glob import a bunch of files. So if we had like a whole bunch of collections in a folder, you could just import them all. Maybe we'll set that up this time. I don't usually do it. I actually just usually do this. So I'll do like import collection page from then I'll do similar with blog. And then I'll cut this out. Make it its own file. And export it. And then do the same thing with blog. And one thing I also like to do is I like to rename this from post to blog, just because that's the language I'm using through the whole thing. Again, it doesn't really matter. This is just like a demo collection type, but you can do that if you want to. Okay, and then the other thing is it pulls whatever's in here. That's where it gets its content. So we need to make sure that content is content post is renamed to blog, just so it can pull things directly. Okay, so now at this moment we've got everything's separated into these two things. And so this is how I would normally do it, but we'll look into doing a glob import because that might make things a little bit more convenient. But so I would just put in the stuff that used to be in here. Now it's being imported from elsewhere. So here, I'll save this and we'll test it really quick and just make sure it's running okay. Should be fine. Uh-oh. So, I think I was thinking about something else when I wrote that. So this should be blog. And let's look at it. I'm sure it's fine. Okay, so let's try and do a glob import. Now, I'm not exactly sure what I need to do there. So next.js glob import. Load file sync. What's that? Oh, I see. This is like building a GraphQL thing. It's not quite the same. Glob import. Well, maybe there is no really great way to do this in Next. I don't know. I thought there was. Huh. Okay. Well, that's fine. I find that this works pretty well. So this is usually what I do. I've done the the glob import thing on like Vite sites and things like that, and sometimes it's okay. But this is really clear like where this stuff comes from. So maybe that's a little bit better. While we're in here, let's look at the other stuff that we've got here. So this is what sets up a folder to be like your media manager base, right? So you don't have to do it this way. Like they have a few add-ons that you can use that will allow you to not use a folder, and like so you can use like Cloudinary or I don't know. I can't remember what the other ones are, but they have a few different managers for media. Those are pretty cool too. For right now, we'll just use this one, but maybe we'll set something up really fancy like later. All right, so now we've got these two collections, and when we want to mess with them, we just go into the individual files, and we can keep them like kind of self-contained now. So anything that this thing needs, like you can just put it right in here. It's ready to go. One other thing to note is that whenever you change the schema, you have to stop the server and restart it. Sometimes you even have to like clean out the generated folder, but usually not. If you just stop the server and start it again, you should be good. The reason for that is that any of these changes to the file system, like it doesn't necessarily know when you've like changed the schema underneath it, and it can sort of screw up the GraphQL server because the GraphQL server doesn't really hot reload. So just keep that in mind. If things are acting weird and they don't seem to be like shaped the way you think they will, that might be part of the reason why. Okay, so now that we've got this thing, the first thing I want to set up is a blocks-based page, which is the idea of blocks is that you have a bunch of things that you can show inside a single page instead of just content. So currently what happens is this gets turned into an AST tree for the MDX, which is just like a parse like structured object, and then it uses that as the like main content. Well, you can do other things too though. So like this is just like the simplest possible way, and I'm probably going to keep it for blog. I'm probably going to keep it this way. But for pages, I kind of like it when you can like build the page as you go. So here, let me just open up another project really quick. So essentially, I've got a lot of different projects here that I probably shouldn't share on screen. So I'll just work on those, but I can pull out things that might be useful. So All right, so if we've got this thing, here, I'll look at one of my collections that I've already got. All right, here's a good one. So currently, body is just pulling everything off, and it's just getting it directly out of the content. Now you'll notice that it's using MDX as the name here, and what this means, like first it triggers the extension, so that's the simplest part, and that's how it gets a list of things. So it says, give me all the files that are .mdx. That's the first part. The next part is that MDX files can have like React in them. They can have React components, and so I'm actually going to make blog do that too. So the default is Markdown. I'm going to turn the format into MDX here. So that's like going to be the first thing. And in order to enable that, I need to rename this MDX just so it picks it up. Now, MDX is pretty much Markdown. The only difference is it has like slightly more strict like structuring. Like you can't just put things in however you want. Usually it has to be like correct like code. But overall, it looks like Markdown, and the main bonus is that you can like import. You can have like any kind of components you want in there, so you can have any React components or anything you want, which we're going to use in a bit to do some really fancy stuff. So, all right, so we've got this, and I just renamed blog to MDX. Now, I'm a very incremental worker, so I definitely try things out. Every time I make a big change, I try it out. So let's just make sure that home and blog is like working right. Oh yeah, so here's another problem. So remember we renamed posts to like blog. So let's fix that really quickly. So the first part is in here. I need to make sure. Let's do blog and blog. And this sets up the URL. And then, what else do I need to do? That may be it. That could be everything I need to do. Oh yeah, I think I need to change the layout, because the layout is where the actual link is. So let's change that to this. Now again, the original thing I was doing there is pretty optional. It doesn't really matter, but the reason I'm showing it is because the default like Tina basic Barebones site, it's not going to be what you want no matter what. So I just want to kind of go over like how you make like little changes like that. So one change we're making here is we're just renaming blog. Now we're using MDX files instead of MD files. We have a different URL structure, so we have to make sure our layout covers that and our schema covers that as well. So let's see if that works. Okay, so now we have nothing here. Now the reason we have nothing is because, again, the original folder is called posts. So let's just rename that blog. And let's look at our files. So inside here, everything is still post. So let's just do a find and replace. Normally, this can be very dangerous depending on what you're doing, but I think it's okay here. So we can do a find and replace for post and blog. And do that, and then I'll do the same thing in the index file. Now these two files, they handle slightly different things. So slug is for every blog post that's inside here, whereas the index gives you the list. And when you look at the slug, on Next.js, you always want to do like a get static paths to pre-compute all the possible paths that you could have. And so that's what this is doing. It's just grabbing all the possible blogs, and then it's outputting like all the possible slugs based on that. And this is a pretty simple system where it just uses the file name that they originally saved the thing as, and that's what sets it up. But we could set up something more there if we want, like later on. Maybe I'll get to that. On some sites you might want to like have user configurable URL slugs. So this doesn't really support that, because once you set this file name, it can never change. So that might be frustrating. I'll show you how to get around that if you want. All right, and then the other thing here is, you see it's hard-coded to MD. We need it to be MDX. And let's make sure that this is the same. Yeah, looks pretty good. Okay, so now if we go to blog/blog, it just shows this page, which is what's in index. So you can see this. And let's give the title blog just to keep things consistent. And we can click on Hello World, and this should be blog. Let's double check that that worked. And there we go. So now we've got this page, and we can edit the page. We can do whatever we want. And this is what the structure looks like when it saves it. So, okay, so I think we made that whole change, and everything should be good. Now, one thing I highly recommend is once you get done with like a sort of a milestone change in your code, you always want to like look at what happened in Git and commit anything that is important. So, and let's git add. Okay, so now we've got a clean copy of like that time when we set everything up, just real basic, and it was working. So that gives us a good start. If we make a mistake or things go wrong, we can always go back to this commit. It never really hurts to commit too much. You can just commit like crazy, and you'll have a better life. So, so do that. Okay, so right now. And also, just to sort of a side note for the structure of things, this looks like a lot of files, but basically the .tina folder is what kind of handles your backend. So that's what sets up your schema and your settings for like the GraphQL backend that makes the site work based on your files, however your files are structured. We're putting everything in content just because that's kind of like the default, but you don't have to. You can put them wherever you want. Same thing with components and well, pretty much everything except for pages is optional. Pages comes from Next.js, and public comes from Next.js. So these two folders are just regular Next.js stuff. But as far as Tina is concerned, it doesn't really matter where you put any of your stuff. You can put it wherever you want. In fact, if you wanted to put content inside the Tina folder just to keep it all together, you could. And so essentially what happens is each one of these pages, it has a Tina provider, which hooks the Tina backend to the front end, and then each individual page has an imported layout, and it uses that layout, and that's what this is. This is, again, a totally optional structure. If you wanted to, you could hard code each one of these to have their own HTML or JSX or whatever in here. Doesn't really matter. You can set it up however you want. I usually have like a top level component. In most Next.js sites I work on, I have like a top level page, which kind of serves the purpose that layout does, but the name of it doesn't really matter. So this is the basic like layout that the entire site uses. And if you look at it, you can see that it just basically adds a menu to the top, and then it inserts all the children, whatever goes in there. And so that's what you're seeing here. Like this menu comes from layout. You could have like a footer and a header, and you could have other stuff, but that's all it does. Okay, so that's the structure of the site. We've got a basic setup. We've got collections that are like sorted into a new thing. So let's actually get started on this cool thing that we're working on, which is we want to be able to build pages by using blocks. Now, the concept of blocks is essentially you can think of it as just a list of objects. And so if we say, well, first we get rid of isBody because it doesn't do anything, and we say type is object, and we say list is true. And at this moment, there's a couple things you can do. So one thing is if you set up templates here, you can add fields, individual fields, and it would give you a list of multiple types of things that you could add to the page. Now on our page, we're just going to have rows, so that's it. So let's say, yeah, our first field is just going to be a content row, and we're going to. Oh, you know what? We kind of need a title field too. Let me do that really quick. So, all right, let's set up a title for page. It's funny it didn't have it. I thought the default template had it, but that's okay. All right, so we'll set a title, and we'll set a label. Okay, So this gives us a little thing, and there's a little trick. If you do is title, it'll use it when it has like lists of things. So, whoops, true. So when you have like a list of pages, you'll be able to, you'll see the title in the list, and it's just a little convenience thing. You'll notice in blog, it doesn't even have is title, and I think it just picks is title by default for if the field's named title, as a side note. So I probably don't need this, but I'm going to leave it in there anyway because, I don't know, we might rename this field to something else, and if we do, this will make it so it works. So, all right, so again, I like to see all my changes, so I'm going to stop the server and start it again, and let's just see if there's any errors. Looks like there is, so let's see, is title. Oh, I need required equals true when it's is title. That's a good idea anyway. So users definitely need to import or set that title. It's absolutely necessary. The fields. Oh yes. Okay. So I have an empty fields here. So let's set this up as well. Now, remember, this is the object. And so it's the main content, and we're going to say list true and type object. So this is like what things get added when you when you add a new row. And I took this stuff from the old data. So let's look at it instead like this. So okay. So now we've got title and content rows, and that's it. And we need to give it some fields. I think initially maybe I'll just set like one field that's the body. So let's do that. And I'm just going to paste this from somewhere else, but I'm going to get rid of the templates for now just to keep things simple. So we've only got one field, and it's rich text. I'm trying to think. Yeah, let's see what that looks like. So if we start it, now we've got one field, so it shouldn't error. There we go, everything's cool. Okay, so now if we go to home, it's gonna freak out. The reason is page title is required, but it doesn't have it set. Now there's a couple ways we can fix this. We've got this format set to MDX, and I will say with things where you're doing blocks, honestly, I think JSON is an easier format. It's just like easier to read, and once you go into blocks, you're kind of using like a data structure anyway, so it doesn't make as much sense to like use a content format like MD or MDX. So maybe I'll just do that now, just because I already have to go in there to fix it. Basically, the error, just to be clear, is that this file doesn't have title set. So if we wanted to set it in an MDX file, we would do that, and that would give us the title and prevent the error. But I'm thinking maybe JSON would be better for this anyway because we're doing blocks, right? So let's set it to JSON, and now home MDX we'll just I don't really need to rename it because we're basically going to wipe the file, but let's do something similar in JSON. Now, normally you won't have to edit these things by hand. It's just because this one was already created that it's freaking out that it's like missing something that's required. Normally, a user would not even be able to get to this stage because they'd have to make the content before they could like save it and use it. But here's what that looks like. Now, there's one other change. Again, if you change the extension, you have to make sure that anywhere that you're using it, you have to make sure that it's like got the right name in there, right? Yeah, we won't worry about blog for now. Okay, so we've got this, and we've got the index, and that should give us home. Okay, so let's start this up again, and let's see what happens. Hopefully there's no error. Let's look. Okay, yeah, cool, blank page. So, so the first thing I want to do is the data that's coming in is called data.page, and you can see that this hook is being used, but the way that Next.js works, the props actually come in with the data. The reason you don't use it though is because this function gets in between the client side data that comes from the editor and the backend data. And so by using this thing, you can kind of go between the two, and it gives you this like contextual editor that allows you to like edit things, right? And you can see that it's starting to form here. So now we've got a content row, and it's got one body right here, right? So so that's pretty cool. So this is like what the editor is going to look like eventually. You can see we can set the title to cool or whatever we want. So let's actually use this. Let's start using it. So one thing is we need the Next.js head component. Here, I'll grab the page really quick. And I just, I always look up everything. I spend a lot of time just thinking while I'm like doing the search, and it just helps me to be sure that I get the syntax right when I'm like working on something. You might, I'm sure if you work on Next.js, you probably have this stuff like down, so you don't really need to like go look it up, but I just always do because it gives me a minute to think about things. And yeah. So okay, so here we have data.page.title, and let's just drop this content. We're not actually using that, and let's comment that out because we're not using it. Okay. So right now, all it does is it just sets the title. And if we go back over here, body. Well, that's interesting. Okay. Well, if we refresh, you'll notice that the title got set to cool, and that's because we did this stuff. And I think the refresh thing was happening because the front end was getting out of sync with like its schema stuff. If you ever have problems like that, or you start seeing stuff like this in the console, just Control-C and run it again. That almost always fixes everything. So I would highly recommend that. They often just get out of sync, and there's not much you can do. If you're editing the schema a lot, it has to know, everything has to know how it's shaped, and that can be really tricky. So while I'm here, I'll get rid of that extra line there. Okay, so right now we've got this thing, and we're not really doing anything with the content. So again, let's look at the shape of this, and it's going to come in as rows, and then inside that it's going to come in as body. And I think I kind of want to change that. This should be content row block. And so in one row you might have several boxes. So let's make it a list. I think that'll work. Let's see. So again, I'm messing with the schema, so I'm just going to restart it just to be safe, and let's see if that works. I don't even know if that's going to work, but so one thing we could do to check this is we could go in here, and I do this a lot. So just set up a pre-tag, and this will give us the shape of the data as it appears in the page. So we have like a clear, clear information about what's actually being, what's actually here, and not like just a log, which can be maybe not exactly the same depending on where you are. All right, so if we look at this shape, you can see page has this sys header with the underscore. This just comes right from the GraphQL. And then you can see it has ID and rows is null. So let's add some rows. So we added one row, and you can see instantly it said block is null. So let's edit that. And it doesn't look like list is working here, but we'll fix that. So I saved that, and it got grumpy about it, probably because of this. Now again, I'm changing the schema, so I need to be careful about that. So we'll restart and refresh and just see what happens. Okay, so we've got null rows. Let's try adding a row and edit it and say hello. And that saved correctly. my schema was messed up. I was trying to do something that wasn't valid, but I'll show you how to do what I was thinking of originally in just a sec. So you can see the structure of this is basically rows, and then you've got block, and then inside block, this is a Markdown AST, which is like, again, that's like the parsed abstract syntax tree of whatever you did inside here. So you could, this is a full rich text editor, you can do whatever you want in here. And it'll show up in here as like a nicely shaped object. So the way to render these objects is to use that Tina Markdown thing, right? And so if we wanted to do this, we would say, well, here, let's just do it. So rows.map, and this is going to be data.page.rows. And one thing I like to do is I like to guard against things being empty or things not being an array. So I'll do that really quick just so we don't get any nasty errors. And then this is going to be a row. And inside here, we're going to make a div. The key equals, now let's look at what's in the row, see what I can hook into. Well, there's not really anything. So we'll pull this from the iterator. And it's just always a good idea in React. It's always a good idea to use this key whenever you're doing a loop. Obviously, I'm sure you've seen that error a million times. So, okay. So now we've got this thing, and we can say, well, it's essentially each block or each row just has a block, and the block is that thing. So we can say Tina Markdown. And the content is row.block. All right, now I can clear this out because it's not really doing anything for us. So again, if you look at this, you can see we're keeping this in here just for now so we can see this thing. Maybe I'll put this loop just above it. And maybe to make things easier to read, I'll put a main tag around it just so we can kind of see like where it's rendering. And maybe I'll do article instead of div, just, I don't know, just because I like it better. This is just a standard HTML5 tag right here. So you can see now it's looping over the rows, and it's grabbing each row, and it's just outputting the markdown for that block. And you can see it just inserted hello here. Well, that's pretty boring. I mean, we could do a lot of stuff here. So you can see it's inserting all the things that we want. Now, if we want to look at this a little closer, let's inspect its output and just see how the output's working and just make sure that we can correlate. So here you can see there was already a main tag, but you can see there's this, here's my main tag. And to verify that, we could say main, I don't know, class equals, and it would be class name because we're in React. Class equals page content. All right, so if we go back here, now you can see it, here's our main that has the page content. And then you can see the article, and we only have one article currently, but you can see it looped over it and it rendered all the rich text directly from that AST. So this is a pretty good start. This is our main block page. Now let's add more blocks, and it should look right. So close this, add a new one, and it puts the new ones on top. So let's do this. And let's reorganize them. So 1, 2. You can see it did this block 1, block 2, block 3, and it put each one of those in there. Okay, so I feel pretty good about this so far. I don't think we really need this JSON output anymore. We pretty much got that figured out. We're good. So let's get rid of that. And you can see now you have an editable page system. Now to see what this is outputting and maybe make more sense of why I choose JSON for block kind of pages, you can see here, this is a pretty simple structure to put this into Markdown, you can do it, but it goes into the front matter, so it ends up a bunch of code at the top of the Markdown file, which is a bit hard for me to read. So I just use JSON if I'm doing any kind of like fancy shaped object like this. We're gonna keep using MDX for the blog posts because they literally are just like content plus some meta information that goes at the top in the front matter. Okay, so that's our basic setup. We've got page content, we've got blog posts. We did a bunch of management to get everything like set up the way we want. You can see we've got a full editor here now, and we can edit anything we want here. Because of the way that this stuff is like set up, like using is title and required, that gives you this nice list. So when you go back here and you go to page content, it actually lists it here. Let's do something similar with these content rows items. I find these a little bit confusing. It's just a bunch of rows and it doesn't tell you which one is which. So let's give them a name. So if we look at page, you can see here's where the rich text starts. So let's just start a new one right here. And let's make it type string. And let's call it title. And I'm going to give a description just because it's a little bit obtuse. I try and keep track of when I'm like doing something that's a little bit maybe potentially confusing to the user and just try and document it all. So an optional title for this content row to make it easier to edit. Okay. So we save that, and again, usually when you make changes to the schema, oh, I have a typo too. Usually when you make changes to the schema, you probably want to restart, but it looks like it's all working behind the scenes, so I'll just let it be. I think it's fine. You can see that now when we go in here, now we've got a title. So let's set some titles here. And I'm just gonna set some boring ones. But maybe I'll make these H4s too. So this is a block 2. And this is a block 3. Okay, so that didn't really change anything, even though I gave them all titles. And the reason is I need to set something up in the field. Now, this is a slightly advanced topic, but I think it's good to get started with it right away with Tina when you first start making stuff, because you can really, if you use this trick, you can basically like model any kind of content input, any kind of like component, any kind of weird input at all, and basically it makes everything work really good. So okay, so here's the idea. So if you have anything that you want to change in the front end when Tina is loaded, you basically put it in the UI object on the field. So for this field, we're going to put it in here. And I need to look at my notes really quick because I can't remember exactly how I set it up. Right. Okay. So here's a trick. So if you put item props here, what this does is it takes the children of a list. If it's a list of objects, it takes the children of the list and it uses that to do whatever you want. So you can basically like set any property you want of the parent of that list item based on the children. And so you can see here it's grabbing item title, item comes from here, and it's setting the label to item title. And that's what you get this. Now one other thing we could do is we could say unlabeled row, or maybe we'll just say row. Now, again, this is just a short circuit or where I'm kind of giving it a default just in case there's no title, it'll just say row. And so now we can see that our titles have come in. We've got neat, block 2, and block 3, and let's set up a new one that doesn't have a title. And you can see it has row right there. So now it's much easier to organize because we know, oh yeah, that's the one that has neat. I want to put that at the bottom. I want to put that here. And let's give it a title of block 1. And now we see 1, 2, 3, neat. Okay, so that's the basic structure there. And there's a lot of things you can do with the UI object, and you just basically have to put it in the right place and mess with it. So look into this real thoroughly, because they're like pretty much all the power of custom inputs on Tina comes from the UI section. We'll do some more later, but that's just a quick hint. If you're trying to change how it works, that's where it goes. Okay, so we've got this content. We've got it rendering like rows. Each row has some stuff in it. This is kind of weird that they're titled block. They're not really blocks. They're actually rows. So let's change that really quick. Doesn't really matter. You can change all this stuff on the fly. It doesn't hurt anything. All right, so we got that. And let's look at the data just to see how it works. So you can see it puts in the Markdown, and it grabs the title, puts it all in JSON. And this, for me, is much easier to read just than putting it all. It's basically the same structure in the front matter. So this is a little bit easier for me to read. But you could definitely do this inside of MDX or MD files. It doesn't really matter. Okay, so now we've got our basic thing. So what else do we want to do here? Well, here is a small thing. This use case might not really be helpful directly, but I want to show how to make a custom input thing so you can add stuff to this menu. So if we open this up, you can add more stuff here if you want. Now the way that they set it up, it's like a little bit separate. So that's one thing you have to keep in mind. But it does work. So one thing. If we insert an image here, let's insert an image. So if I insert this Tina image, one issue that I have with the output is that it always has the same height and width. It just uses the image's height and width. If we had the data inside here to do height and width, we could do more advanced things. Like, for example, I could look at the height and width, and I could determine like which URLs to grab from like a remote source. For example, Cloudinary can do like on the fly like cache like cropping and things like that. And so I could make the image like more responsive and work in more environments without the client having to download the image like multiple times, or download a big image when they can only see like a tiny image, you know. So all that's like maybe a more advanced topic, but the short of it is that what I really want is if I had a height and width here, and instead of just being an image, if this was like a smarter component that I could like make those kind of changes that I was just talking about to, it would be way better. It'd be like way cooler. So let's do that. We're going to set up a custom embed here that lets you do an image, and then I'll show you how to like hide things that are in the built-in UI, so that you don't have to use the image that's there. So I don't want to delete that. Let's get rid of. Oh, I see. I think I need to delete it. Okay. So I got rid of the image that was embedded there, but I'll show you that the input that I do here is going to be basically exactly the same. So here's how you do that. So anytime you have let's look at page. Anytime you have a rich text editor, you can add templates, and templates get added directly to the to this menu. So let's add again, I'm looking at my other site off screen just so I can like get some good info. All right, so let's say that we want to be able to add this image. I'm going to paste a whole bunch of code in here real quick, and but I'll explain it, so don't be too frightened. All right, so one thing I often do is I will keep my templates, or like anything that I use more than once. I'll keep in a separate in a separate object and even in a separate file. And so remember how I said you can put stuff in any folder that you want here? It really doesn't matter. As long as you don't overwrite like what Tina's doing, it doesn't care. So here, let's make a new one here, and let's call this forms.jsx. And let's put this in here. Now, I'm getting some syntax error here because image is a global. That's again, all this stuff runs on the client side, so it's fine. It's in the window object, but we're gonna say global image just to get rid of that syntax problem. And let's go over what this does. So this basically sets up a named image tag. You'll notice the first part, the name is capitalized. Now the reason for that is because anything that you put in the templates are going to be React components. So it's better to use like I don't want to use the img tag because it won't pull it out when it does the Markdown render. It'll think like, oh, I see, that's an image tag that you just edited in the Markdown editor. So I'll just use that. I'll just parse that. But we don't want to do that. We want to keep it unmodified in this like separate React space. So we're going to do it like this. But anything you put in here becomes the name of the tag. So if you've already got a tag for doing something, just put the name right in there. Okay, and then we've got a label. That's basically like any other form field in Tina, right? And we've got some fields. So we've got the source, and it's an image type, which means that the media browser is going to work. And you can see here I did something in UI. Remember, UI is always, that's always what happens on the front end in Tina, and it's how you can modify like how it like creates form fields and stuff. And then I messed with validate, and I'll explain that. So essentially validate is the only function that has access to all values, and you can do whatever you want to them, and then the current value as well. So what this does is if you change the image using the media manager, it will create a new image in the DOM, and it will get the height and width of that image, the natural height and width, and it'll save it inside the output. And then additionally, I'm using all values width and all values height to set that to some other fields in the widget, right, or in the template. And then additionally on those things, I set the UI to be component equals null, which means like just don't show any input for width and height. Now I could turn this off and it would show the height and width, and they would just change whenever you like loaded an image. But I don't really want users to change the height and width. I just want it to like basically just hard code the height and width like in the tag that gets outputted. And then additionally I have alt and title, and those are just standard like image things, right? Okay, so now that we have this thing, we can import this here. Components. Make sure I got the name right. Forms.jsx. I always spell this word wrong. Okay, so we've got components, forms.jsx, right? So now we can use this thing inside here, and I'll show you what that does. So again, because I saved this before with this image, it's always showing it. So let's just get rid of it because that's a little bit confusing. So we get rid of that first. And I want you to notice this new thing. So now we've got an embed here. Oh, wow. I accidentally hit a code thing. Okay, interesting. So now we've got this embed thing, and we can embed whatever we want, and it'll show whatever is inside this templates thing. So if we try and embed an image, it just shows image, right? And you can edit or delete it. And this looks really similar to the built-in image thing, but you can see it's using all my fields, right? So let's insert this. And behind the scenes, it's already created this height and width for us. And let's set some alt text. So Tina and Tina is cool. Okay, let's save it. Now, you'll notice that nothing happened over here. So there's no automatic output of this custom React component The reason is that we haven't set it up yet, but I'll show you how to set it up. So if we look at the data, let's look over here in our home.json again. You can see it's getting a little bit more complicated, but what it outputted was a JSX tag here, and it used the height and the width and the alt and the title, and it created that image in line. So this is MDX, right? So it's parsing that. And remember I said you can mix React components with Markdown in MDX. So we'll be able to use that. The main thing we have to change though is in here, we have to tell Tina Markdown, we have to tell it how to render things. So here's how you do that. Always spelling that wrong. All right. And so the components object is just it's just an object with a shape, and the keys are the names of the tags that you want to replace. Now you can replace any of the built-in ones, like the P tag is like how it does all text. The H tags, you know, like H1, H2, H3, etc. are you can just put them right in here. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to say image equals and oops. Okay, so initially I'm just going to make it just output an image. It's pretty boring. Now one field that comes in here, like one thing that comes in on every component, it's the only field that that Tina is adding is the type. So we're going to pull it out and just not use it basically right here. And then here I'm spreading all the props that come from the image and I'm just inserting them right here. Okay, so if we look here, we're probably going to need to refresh to get the new stuff, but you can see it made an image, but here's the difference. Now that image tag has a height and a width, and it like all set it up correctly. Now this is just one example, but you can do anything you want here. So anything you put in this object can be shared between different Markdown renderers and can be used to insert any kind of like custom thing. So an example might be like if you wanted to have YouTube embeds, or you wanted to have like Instagram, you know, posts that like show up, or like you know, somebody inserts a tweet and they just set the tweet ID and it like makes it all fancy and looks like Twitter or whatever. You can do that. It's all up to you, like what components you add here. Anything goes here, and you can basically build them kind of like I did here, where you know, you make a template and then you use that template inside your content type like this. So yeah, you might have a lot of new inputs, or you might, you know, maybe the actual input is just a string. For example, like if you were doing tweets, you might just say like input the tweet ID here, and that could just be a string. It doesn't need to be fancy like this. The only reason this one's fancy is because I needed to modify the input on the fly on the front end before it gets saved. And again, that will actually save in the file. It'll save it like this, and that gets rendered as our tag. Okay, so that trick right there is kind of like the basis of all the editing that you might need to do. Like, so because you can do component in the UI object, you can put whatever you want in here. If you wanted to put a slider or some other kind of like input widget that gets a value and on change, you can do that. Right here, I'm just ignoring it, like I'm hiding it. That's fine too. You can do that as well. But I think that's the basics of like a simple Tina setup. We can go over more stuff later, but I think this is probably good for the first video. So have fun.